Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you will be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. Hello everyone, this is Andrew and Daphne from Generation to Generation, and our guest today is Tod McDowell. Tod, for people that don't know who you are, can you just say a bit about where you're from and what you do?
Yes, thank you. It's great to be with you guys. I'm from the West Coast of the United States. I was born in California and raised in Oregon and met Jesus as a hippie boy at 10. Parents never took me to church, never heard the name Jesus till I heard it from a hippie pastor, the Jesus movement pastor, and I was smoking pot before that was my bar mitzvah at 8 years old, and when I came to Jesus, I felt the love of the Father for the first time. And both my mother and father didn't really know how to mother and father anyone because both of their parents were super busy. And my mom's dad was a military commander, and my dad's dad, his father committed suicide when he was 7, and he just worked 3 jobs and just worked his whole life, became successful. But yeah, so when I received Jesus, something shifted, and I ended up going to college and wanted to be a lawyer and change the world, make money. And then the Lord saw my heart to want to change the world and said, why don't you do missions? So I thought I'll get it out of my system. I did this discipleship training school in Hawaii and YWAM, and as the founder says, I was ruined for the ordinary. On my outreach in Thailand, I saw signs and wonders, bones knit together, blind eyes opened when I prayed, and I was like, what in the world? Why? I wouldn't want anything else. So I went back and I got married and went back for 15 years in YWAM, Hawaii, and just realized my calling was really to equip and empower leaders, young leaders. And so I began doing that. And I wanted to go to the unreached. My passion still is to reach the unreached and go to the hardest and darkest places in the earth. But the Lord said, I'll have more effectiveness if I multiply the passion I have in others. And that if I go and just lay my life down, that would be awesome and I'd see fruit. But if I can multiply what God's given me in dozens and dozens of others, they can exponentially reach way more than I could ever reach. And so for the last 30 years, it's been 30 years this month, I've been in full-time missions ministry, trusting God. He's been faithful to provide. Bought a couple homes, gave some away, sold some. Just the Lord's just been faithful. I have 4 children. My wife and I we got married in 93, so it'll be 29 years of marriage this summer. Woo!
Wow.
Time flies. And we have 4 kids. My daughter's 26. She's was full-time in YWAM for 4 years and got into CrossFit. So she's now a coach, CrossFit coach in the secular industry, but as a missionary reaching tons and tons of people in California. My son, Micah, got married. He's 24. And they went to Hawaii for a year just to work, not to do ministry. And they both have done their YWAM DTS, and my daughter as well. And they have a passion for Israel, the Middle East, and for missions. My 3rd child, Makayo, is 21. He has amazing testimony. He kind of got bored in high school and wanted to see if he was missing out on things and tried a little bit of every drug he could find and did crazy stuff. Unfortunately, he has a similar personality as me, very curious and fearless. And God just arrested him. I mean, he got arrested, went to jail, went into different programs, got kicked out a couple of times. And then he's like, you know what? I'm going to surrender my life to Jesus fully. And during that whole time, he still was, loving God as much as he could. He wasn't rejecting God, but he just had that lie from the enemy. I want to have fun. And finally realized that was not fun. And so just last week, He's been working all year, paid off all his debts, made restitution for everything. A judge cleared his record, 11 felonies, 13 misdemeanors. It's a miracle of miracles. So he can walk in his calling as a missionary. So last week he flew to South Africa and he's doing his DTS right now, Discipleship Training School. And just talked to him yesterday morning. He's loving it. He's sitting on the front row. A friend of mine showed me a picture. So anyway, that's my third son. It's amazing. And then my fourth son is the last one. He's Moses. He's 18, finishing his high school year. All my kids were soccer players and track runners, and he's got his, varsity soccer season ahead of him. So I'm actually cutting back on some trips for this next 4 months just to be there and support him. Right now, my wife is actually in California helping my daughter get ready for her wedding this June. So my wife's gone for a week, so I'm Mr. Dad and Mr. Mom. Cooked breakfast for him this morning and cooked dinner last night. It's like my wife prepped it all, but man, I'm just getting up early, staying up late, doing CrossFit in the afternoons instead of the early mornings so I can be there for him. So yeah, my passion is to see Jesus, personally, his presence, his glory, but I want to know, and I want to know his heart, and I want to love what he loves. And that's how he led me towards the nations, that God loved the world so much that he gave his son to reach the nations. That's his inheritance. And I want to give Jesus his inheritance, and then he's going to give it to the Father. And so that's my passion for the lost and the nations, is his passion. And then also Israel. I just was praying, God, I want your heart. I want to know your ways. And he showed me, if you want to know his heart, he loves Israel. He loves the Jewish people. And it's not, it's not like they're better than anyone. He's no respecter of persons. But Deuteronomy says, he set his affection on them. And he chose them because of love. And it's a covenant of love with them. So it's a beautiful Middle Eastern love story that we're grafted into. And we share the nourishing sap from the olive root. We're not the roots, the Jewish people and the faith of Abraham and his descendants. That's the roots. Yes, it's faith. And we're grafted in because of faith. But there's a beautiful richness. And Paul said in Ephesians, God's broken down the dividing wall and made peace. But with most Gentiles in the church today, don't even know that there is a one new man still today of Jew Gentile. That's the word one new man. It's the same word as becoming one in marriage. So there's this beautiful just brotherhood. We're all one bride. There's not a Jewish bride and a Gentile bride, but there's a uniqueness, just like a male and a female. Men don't become women when they get married, And so Jew and Gentile, even though we're one, there's still Jew and Gentile. And God has this beautiful story that I didn't know for like 17 years of ministry, and then met Don Finto. And I've been just so enjoying the beauty of God's heart. And then I'm like, okay, I know his heart and I want to walk it out. So I've set my eyes on Jerusalem like Jesus did, those last passages in all the Gospels that said he fixed his eyes on Jerusalem. I personally have just said, God, I want to see your love reach your people. And it's tough. And, there's like 4 million Christian tourists before COVID that would go to Israel. Hardly any of them would reach out with love of the gospel. I love Sid Roth said the most anti-Semitic thing you can do to a Jewish person is not share Yeshua with them, not share the gospel. So I'm like, but we need to do it in love and humility, because Christians have tried to dominate, control, kill, steal, all the pogroms and the Holocaust. So we go low, we honor, we ask forgiveness basically as Gentile Christians in every conversation, and honor them like we worship your God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Most of them say, no, I'm not that religious. And, oh, no, it wasn't your family that did the Holocaust, but watch what happens. Their hearts open up because of the humility. Anyway, yeah. So I'm directing this ministry called Caleb Global, founded by Don Finto, and our vision is to ignite revival in Israel, the Middle East, and the nations in that order. And the word of God promises when the Jewish people come back, it's going to be life from the dead for the world. And their fullness, the fulfillment of God's promises them to be their God and to give them their land. Those fulfillments release greater riches to the Gentiles, to the nations. So I really kind of want to, the Lord's given me a strategy. How do you want to bless the whole earth? Bless Israel and get the Jewish people restored and saved, knowing their Father, knowing their Messiah. And so that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
It's a good one.
Before we go on, because you've said a whole bunch of things, there's a number of things there which are very similar to us. For people that listen to this and they want to find out more about you, maybe find some of your resources, Don's books, things like that, where can they do that?
Yeah, our website is caleb.global, and they can just go on there and there's resources on that. You can get links to Don's books, and you can Google Caleb.global or Caleb Global on YouTube, or my name, Tod McDowell. And there's different teachings and things. And yeah, if anyone wants to, we've still time. You could go to Israel with us this April. We're going to go April 24th to May 8th, and it's going to be amazing. And then we also do training every fall, like between August and November. And just anyone who has a calling to really influence the world, to love the Jewish people, to reach out to the Middle East, the Arabs and the Jews. We've been going to Iraq, Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt as well. Last 2 years with COVID, we haven't stopped going. And he's really given us his heart for the Arab bride and shown us the way he wants to provoke the Jews to jealousy is by getting the Arabs to love Israel and to love the Jewish. I found myself teaching on Israel to all these Arab leaders and pastors, and it was offensive a little bit at first, but then it's amazing. It's just God's heart, and it's his word. And if anybody's interested in Israel, the Middle East, it's more of a leadership type training. It's not basic discipleship. We really recommend doing other discipleship schools and then coming to our school. It's called School of Revival, and you can go online and just do an inquiry and we'll get back to you. So,
okay.
Or if you're in Nashville, look us up. We do monthly gatherings here called Community Sabbats, and we do morning worship every morning. I just led worship this morning, and you're welcome.
And I'll put those links in the description box. So if you're listening, you can go there and they're ready for you to check out.
Thanks.
So there's quite a lot of directions we could go from what you've just shared, but I want to pick up one thing just to dip into for a moment, because I personally am really curious. When your son completely fell away, I don't know how you completely fell away, because you either fall away or you don't, but anyway, when you were going through all that time and he was in prison and on drugs, as a parent whose only desire is that our children follow Jesus all the days of their life, how did you and your wife handle that? I mean, I'm personally really curious, because I don't think I've asked anybody that. I just can't imagine it.
Yeah, I think that was not easy. It was probably the hardest test for me. Like, at first there was that the enemy wants to blame you as a parent, like it's my fault. And to be honest, I realized I had some criticalness towards other leaders. When I'd see their kids go off and do dumb things and crazy things, I thought, you know what? I bet you that dad just wasn't there for them. I bet you they weren't secure in the love of their father, or I bet you there was just hypocrisy or something going on. And so it really humbled me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I am sorry for judging other leaders' for their children, and realizing it's free will. we did our best with, all our kids are different, but we really tried to just love them. Taught them to encounter God and hear God's voice since they were little. Every Sunday night we do family soaking where we wait on the Lord. They get their journals, their Bibles, and they've been hearing God's voice since they were little. And they know him. Because I realized, I could force them to memorize scripture and just get it in their head. And then it's like this debatable thing in their head, but I wanted them to experience God and know him. Like Paul said, open the eyes of my heart, give me a spirit of wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of you. So from a young age, they couldn't deny the reality of God and their own real relationship, because they'd get pictures, they'd feel his presence, they'd hear his voice, they'd write it down. It was super, my kids are all really prophetic. So even during that season, his name's Micaiah. When he was born, we felt the Lord say, he's a gift. And because we were not sure if we should stop at 2, because we had one girl, one boy. We're like, all right, that's good. and then Micaiah came, and the Lord said, he's a gift. So we knew we were going to name him Gift of God, which is Matthew. We didn't know what language. We felt it wasn't English. So we're looking Mateo or Matityahu in Hebrew or whatever. But the Lord said, name him Hawaiian name, because all my kids were born in Hawaii. So we named him Hawaiian for Matthew, which is Micaiah. Difficult to say in the South, poor kid. When he moved here, people are like, what? But he's been special. He's been very bold, fearless. But he went to private Christian school, and then our other 2 older ones went to the public high school their last 2 years, and graduated with a big class, played varsity sports, and so he wanted to follow his sister and his brother. And he told us this later. He said, Dad, I didn't even know the name of 2 drugs when I started my junior year. He said, after 2 weeks, I had tried 20 drugs. Wow. Like, he just was super curious, and he's not really addicted to drugs. When he stopped, he'd had no withdrawals. It was just it was trying to fit in, basically. He realized that was his idol, was pleasing people, fitting in, being cool, being popular. And unfortunately, or fortunately, he's a leader. So when he jumped into the bad stuff, he ran to the front of the line and did the worst things, tried the hardest drugs. People were doing dumb things, criminal kind of things. He ran to the front of the line for no reason, broke into this house, and just because he was hungry, and he was, it was just dumb. Found later that house was a retired sheriff in our city, which was not so cool. So that was actually super crazy that the judge pardoned that, because, anyway, about 2 years later, it was a miracle. But when this was happening, Rachel and I just both felt like we were out of control. We couldn't control him. And we tried our godly disciplining that we'd done with all our kids, taking away privileges, grounding, taking the phone, all these things. And he would just get worse. And he was a double life. We didn't know what he was doing. And then finally we realized this is scary. And he left for a week and took our van and then came back. And he was so contentious. And I just felt the Lord say, and Rachel and I, my wife was starting to just the stress and the trauma of it was really damaging her body, and the stress on us. And there was one time the Lord said, I was like, God, you got to help my wife, help me. We're I'm not depressed by nature, but I felt this depression. And the Lord said, laugh. I'm like, what? That's the last thing I want to do. And we're praying and interceding for him. The Lord said, laugh. I'm like, what? Why? And then he reminded me of Psalm 2. How the kings of the earth, they conspire and they mock, and in that context, the God's people and God's the king, but it's a picture of the end times, and even just this mockery and this conspiring and this threatening and this pride, and then it says, but God sits in heaven and laughs. Mm-hmm. It's like, who are they? And I felt So I told my wife, I said, I feel like we have to laugh. Like, even Proverbs 31, the godly woman, it says she laughs at her future. So I just felt like I said, Rachel, let's just laugh over it's nothing. Like what the enemy's doing with Kaio, it's not going to last. God is way bigger. Let's just laugh. It took us like 10 minutes because it felt so fake. We're like, ha, ha, ha. And then all of a sudden, we started laughing, and it's like the enemy just got teeny, God got huge, and we realized it's nothing for God. It's nothing. And it lifted off the stress. And my wife felt the Lord say, you can't carry him. So we stopped carrying him and said, God, you got to carry him. My wife felt the Lord say, I'm going to wrap you up in wings. And she felt literally clothed and cloaked. Like it says Yeshua, longed to hold, Matthew 23:30, longed to hold the children of Israel in his arms like a mother hen, its chicks. And Rachel felt this wings of God covering her. It's like Psalm 91, just under the shadow of the Almighty. And she just felt this peace. And then I did too. And then Micaiah turned 18, and I was like, I'm going to take your phone away. And I didn't know, but he called the police. And I guess when you're 18, you can't take a phone. It's like, so the police came out and said I had to give his phone back. I was like, Kyle, I want to discipline you because I want you to humble yourself. And he said, only the law can discipline me. And I started crying. I was like, Kyle. So I realized, God, I can't. He's not responding to my fatherly discipline. And it was 4 days later, he was arrested and went to jail. It's like, and later in jail, he's like, Dad, bail me out. And I felt the Lord say no. And I said, Kyle, remember you said, you're only going to be disciplined by the law. I said this is what's happening. And it really, he still remembers that, like he chose, and, but God's so faithful. God covered him, protected him, walked with him. And, the day that I found out he got arrested, I didn't know he had committed these crimes or anything. And I got a text. I was supposed to preach at one of the larger churches in this town. I got a text from the pastor saying, Todd, I understand if you don't feel like preaching, that's fine. I saw the news tonight about Micaiah. I was like, what news? And I look, and he's on the news. I don't really watch TV. And it was all my friends that were like over 40 watched it. All the younger ones, they don't watch the news. And it showed a surveillance picture of him committing a crime, and everyone knew. And then he went to jail because they identified him within a few hours. So that was Friday. I'm preaching Sunday. The Lord says, still preach. I'm like, no. And I felt this shame, like I'm not worthy of preaching. Like my son is in jail. And the Lord said, no, it's you're a son yourself. Like, it's not, your son is not your identity. Like, let go of shame. So I'm so grateful I had to preach, because I had one day I had to fight all the lies of the enemy and fight shame. And I got up broken and weeping and just talking about the love of the Father and the goodness of God. And it was one of the more broken, raw messages I've ever done. You could look it up, Grace Center message. 2 years ago in May. But yeah, something happened, and it just, shame broke off, and I walked in more intimacy than I've ever walked in, and my wife did too. And this is crazy. A year and a half later, for my 50th birthday, Rachel, I love extreme sports and surfing and crazy stuff. That's why I love going to the nations and crazy countries and stuff. But she got me this, what do you call it when you jump out of a plane? Skydiving.
Skydiving.
A coupon for it, and I didn't use it for 6 months. I was so busy and stuff going on, and it's like it was only good for 6 months. So I'm like, I gotta use this, and then so this is like a year and a half later, and Rachel wanted to go with me. The night before, she said, Todd, God's just telling me it's time to fly. It's time to fly. And I'm like, what? And she said, that word that he said, he covered me with wings and wrapped me up. He said, that's not helping me anymore. It's restricting me. God wants to open up his wings and he wants me to fly. I'm like, what? And then she said, I think I'm supposed to skydive with you. She hates heights. She hates crazy things, hates adrenaline rush. I'm like, no, they're probably booked. I checked that night. They got an opening on the same thing I did. So we went together, went up in the plane together.
Wow.
And she said she had no fear because she just felt Jesus with her. She said the initial thought when they jumped out of the plane is, I'm going to die, because it was head first with no parachuting. And then all of a sudden she just started flying and felt Jesus, and something shifted in her. Like she's been soaring ever since. So anyway, God's been so gracious. And Micaiah's just gotten soft towards us. And I realize it's not just his testimony. God told my wife, it's our testimony too.
Exactly.
Like,
and I think, Todd, I think, Todd, it's something so many parents need to hear. Really need to hear. I mean, as we travel around, we see so many people who are broken and are feeling failures and feeling the shame, and it is heartbreaking. I feel inadequate to respond because I haven't had that experience. But you have. What would you say to people who are listening and they're right in the middle of this? What would you say to them?
I would just say the message that God gave me was hope. And I realized looking back, I spoke so many times when I preached or taught in schools on hope, because hope is an expectation of good. It's not faith. Faith is where it's kind of resolved and you just start walking on it. It's like, I know that I know, and I'm just going to step out. Hope is like, I am not sure I can even move a foot. But you know what hope is? It's this. I'm going to stand up. That's hope. It's like, you know what? I'm going to stand up. I'm going to expect God's going to give me grace to start walking. I'm not walking yet. I walk by faith, but I stand in hope.
Wow.
And so I just felt that, like God just said, believe for what's unseen. Be sure what you hope for. Like, just trust me. And the brokenness and the not knowing and when it's your own child, it's the most devastating. Like, you feel empty inside. You feel broken because they're connected to you and they're your legacy. They're your dreams, your hope. But it really, God meets you there. So you don't have to get out of that place to meet with God. You walk through the valley of the shadow of death, he's with you. When it's not just he threw his rod and his staff to you, it's him with the rod, with the staff, with you in that dark valley. And so Rachel and I had more encounters, more intimacy. And the brokenness, I feel like makes me... I used to be just thinking when I'm sharing, I've just got to be super strong and super pump everyone up and let's run. But there's a softness and a brokenness and a tenderness that has come through that broken time, that I met just the goodness of God in a way that I never knew. And so every test, every trial, he's with us and he works it for good. And we have to believe that. Mm-hmm. If you look internally and try to change your circumstances, you're going to get even more discouraged and more depressed, or, especially if you look inside yourself and try to, psychoanalyze, just set your eyes on Jesus and hold his hand and get healing, get prayer. Like, we sought prayer, we sought healing. And a lot of times pain and trauma can trigger past pain and past trauma. And even some of my story of being rejected and not fathered and mothered, the way my parents did the best they could with what they had. But I came out of it more healed and more secure, and realizing I can't control my kids. I can just steward them. I can't control my ministry. I can't control anything except for my own intimacy with Jesus. And my wife and I both were broken together, and our marriage got way stronger. And we still feel really, it's been super, super sweet. So don't give up. Make sure you're surrounded by people. We have our team, and we share every Tuesday a check-in. And all my team is like more than half younger than me. They're in their 20s, early 20s. But I would be open with them every week and honest with them about what we're going through. So we walked in community through it. A lot of tears, a lot of vulnerability, and there's no answers. You don't need an answer. You just need someone with you. And can I just pray for anybody who is experiencing that?
Yeah.
So Father, I just ask right now, you see your children, and anybody who has any child that is not walking in the fullness of their calling, or even at worst, running away from their calling, or being tempted and lured by the devil with all kinds of temptations, and kind of like the prodigal son or daughter, and even it's just coming to my mind, even kids that have gender confusion and identity confusion and are running in just perverted ways and totally opposed to your ways and your will. I just ask for grace right now, a spirit of grace and supplication, that you would be sweetly broken and that you just surrender to the cross. And I ask, God, would you give them just this unconditional love, that it's not your fault. Of course, none of us are perfect parents, but I just pray, and even others of you who are friends of others that are doing this, or a family where there's someone like this, I just ask, God, would you strengthen them? And I thank you for the word for hope. In Hebrew, talks about lots of little teeny strands that are woven together that create this strong rope. And the root of hope is like this rope that's woven together. And I just pray little teeny promises from you, little teeny thoughts of goodness and your kindness would be woven together in each heart right now, that they could hold on to your character, to your promises, to your word, and hold on to hope. In Yeshua's name.
Yeah.
Amen.
I want to ask you about something else that you mentioned earlier. You said that you had this desire to go to the nations, and then God said to you, well, you can do that, but it would be, I don't know if better was the word, but another option is that I use you to raise up lots of other people and send them out. And this is a very, very similar story to the way God spoke to us. He said, you can go to the nations, that's fine, or I can use you to raise up others and send them out. It's a very similar thing. As you walk through that, some people might say, well, I'm getting to raise up other people, but I'm getting to see them then live out what I wanted to live out. And I don't get to live that out because I'm now doing something completely different. You get to be a part of seeing them doing that and flourishing, and you're a part of that journey. Was that a struggle for you, seeing people going out and doing what you wanted to do, or did God instantly change that in you to just love sending other people out to do it?
It's a great question. I thought you were going for a more simple question, and you dropped into that deeper question. I was just going to talk about all the multiplication. I'm like, you know what? I actually just have the flash of a memory in Hawaii when I started catching this, because just for all, maybe I don't think everyone's like this, but for me and maybe some others, there can be like an orphan spirit. When there's a lack of identity, the Father gives you identity, and even natural, but most spiritual Father. But when you have this orphan spirit, you always have to prove yourself, and it's more performance. And you see other brothers and sisters more as your competition, and like, oh no, they're amazing. Wow, you go up to, that was awesome, great job, and then you walk away going, oh man, I gotta do better. That's what I have to compete with, Yeah. I mean, you don't say that to anyone else, but you just feel like, oh, how did I measure up? Because there's that insecurity and that needing to prove yourself. And I definitely had that for years and years in ministry. Wouldn't admit it, didn't really understand that's why I speak so much on identity now. Because if you get your identity secure in who God says you are, then man, it takes so much stress off you. Because you don't have to prove yourself every day and perform. And, on a podcast, you don't need to be cool. You can just talk about your kid and your wife and cry, like it's fine. But I remember in Kona, like, because there was so much. It was the biggest mission in the world, biggest base of the biggest mission in the world. I'm the youngest elder with the eldership meeting at the founder's house, and I kind of had worked my way up, and I felt this pressure, and then I realized, what am I doing all this for? Like, I realized my identity I was also a local pastor. I was a missions leader. And the Lord I was like, God, I don't care anymore. I just want you. And I felt like he said, Todd, I don't want you to worry so much about your destiny, about what you're going to do, where you're going to end up, where you're going. I want you to think more about your dynasty. What are you going to leave behind? What's going to happen to your children's children, natural and spiritual? And I was like, what? And it just shifted like my value for just performing and doing a lot of cool stuff myself to being more strategic and to being basically a father. A father that passes on to his children. And I definitely didn't do it perfect. People say, well, how did you do that? How come your kids all love Jesus and they're radical? And I was like, you know what? I said I'm sorry quite a bit. and I asked them to forgive me. And then I love the verse that says love covers a multitude of sins. So it's like I'd blow it, I'd get angry, I'd do dumb things. And then I just would like, you know what? I'm going to love them. I'm going to get better at loving them. And God, that's going to cover a multitude of sins. There's one passage. I grabbed my Bible. I was actually thinking about this the other day at a party on Sunday. And this kind of hit me. You guys, this is you guys' shtick. This is what you guys do, huh? Teaching on this. But I'm going to dabble in it for a second just because. But this whole thing, when I was reading in Genesis, the passage about the Lord, the angel of the Lord, and the three angels that appeared to Abraham, and then we kind of know. And then they're like, shouldn't we tell Abraham that we're about to wipe out, his Lot, his nephew? We're gonna just destroy Sodom. Should we just tell him like he's a friend, And then but it says. There's this key little thing in there, and it kind of jumped out at me when I was reading it, that just shows why. So let's see. Where is it? In Genesis 18. Okay, yeah. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do, seeing Abraham shall surely become a great mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. So it's like, shouldn't I tell Abraham God's gonna use him to bless all the nations and through him? And then it gives the reason God chose Abraham. It says, for I've chosen him that, this is the reason he chose him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord.
Yep.
It's like, I was reading that going, God, you chose Abraham Not because he has a radical faith or he's crazy obedient, which he was. Just started going without really knowing where he's going. Kind of like you guys, just, you got this city, this city, this city, and then you don't know. You're just going to keep going. But he chose him because for him to teach his children the way of the Lord. And so I believe if that's the founder of our faith, like Father Abraham had many sons, I'm one of them, so are you. Let's just praise the Lord. If that's the reason God chose him, then that's why he's chosen us. And it doesn't have to be natural children. It could be some people that are like spiritual children can be older than you. But we are chosen so that we can receive God's ways and then teach his ways to the next generation.
But one of the beauty, a beautiful twist in a way, I think I have gleaned from your journey, from watching from afar, it's not just of your passing on a legacy, but you have aligned yourself to a legacy in Don Finto. I think I remember you speaking about that, and I thought there is a beauty in your aligning yourself both forward and what's coming behind. Could you just tell people how you got that? I think it was a revelation you almost had, wasn't it?
Yeah, man, you guys are good.
Yeah.
That's
we keep our eye on you. You know not who's watching you from afar.
Good question. Wow, yeah, that was huge. That kind of goes back to that whole orphan thing, trying to prove something. Because I started getting revelation when I was in Kona and YWAM about revival, and I was getting keys to revival. I did a 40-day fast with a young guy, Andy Bird, which was one of my guys I mentored for 8 years. And talk about somebody that he's doing what I would love to do. That's one of them. He's just all over the earth, riding the revival wave, and just leader. And he's just godly, humble, beautiful family. When they came to Nashville, they came and stayed in this house, this room his daughters were in. But, he's one of my spiritual sons. And he's doing way more than I'm doing. Way more. And I love it. I love it. So, but I was going to start my own ministry called Ignite in YWAM. Because I felt like God said, people need to know God and make him known. That's the motto of YWAM. And I was like, they need to know God intimately, and they need to make him known in power. So that was like the Ignite slogan. Like, let's just go for more intimacy and more power. And I had a whole crew of a bunch of young leaders. We started a prayer room first prayer room on the campus. We started praying for Israel, got Israel. And I was like, I'm going to start my own ministry. And it's going to be Ignite. I was looking at logos and names and getting the nonprofit credentials. And then I met Don. And then 2 years, so I'm starting to form this team. We got everyone together, and I'm just feeling the grace of God, the favor of God on my life. I already have a lot of favor in Hawaii and everything. And then the Lord asked me to walk with Don. I'm like, what? And then I shared with my wife. She's like, if you're going to walk with Don, you need to call him every day. It's like, call him every day. I'm already a leader in missions. I'm a pastor. And I'm supposed to all of a sudden have this mentor and call him every day. And then God said, move and learn from Don. I'm like, what? And I just gave up the favor in the role as a pastor, the favor in YWAM as one of the leaders of, the whole base and speaking all over the world. And I stopped traveling, and I just humbled myself and came under Don. And I realized that and I felt this, I didn't admit it, but I realized, for one, I was sacrificing my family on the altar of ministry. I was so busy with little kids. And for two, I felt like I was the house of cards, because I was quickly released in leadership at a young age. And there was areas of my character that I could just crumble. And Don just loved me as a father. And then after walking with him and moving to Nashville, I thought I'd move here for a year and then leave and go to the Middle East and keep doing cool stuff for God. And then the Lord said, would you be willing to be a son that stewards his inheritance? Basically, like, would you help further his legacy? Would you give up your own thing, your own ministry? And even I never even really liked the name Caleb Company, back then. And he asked me, Todd, God gave him a dream on Yom Kippur that I was the director of Caleb 2 years after I moved here. And I prayed with Rachel, and actually this guy, Osher and Trader in Israel, I met right around the same time. And Osher looked at me and said, Todd, are you a true son to Don? Are you going to take his inheritance? Are you going to live this out, or are you not? Because I see, it looks like he really loves you, you really love him. And I'm like, and it was, as only an Israeli can do, just nailed me and was like really serious. And he said, if you're not, he said, I will step in and I will try to help further the legacy of Don with all his books and all this stuff. And Osher was willing to kind of embrace everything Don was doing and let it go through Revive and all that. I called my wife that day, said, Rach, do you think everything God's put in our hearts we could do through Caleb, like for the rest of our lives? Can we commit to this? And we prayed, and it was really somber, and we both felt, yes, we're in this for life. And I'm going to further Don's legacy. And I'm going to humble myself and direct his ministry. And I felt the Lord just say, multiply the heart that I've given Don and multiply the messages I've given Don. And then I just did that for like 10 years. And about 5 years ago, the Lord said, it's time to bring back some of the missional heart I've given you. So right now, I'm continuing the legacy of Don, but I'm also, the Lord saying, it's time for this global call and this missional call. So we shifted the name of Caleb a year and a half ago to Caleb Global, which kind of brings some of the DNA I've carried, but I laid it down for 10 years just to fully embrace multiplying Don's message and Don's character, basically, through training and internships and staff.
I'm listening to, obviously thinking of this through our whole generation to generation paradigm. And when you said about bringing back in some of who you were into all that Don has had, don't you think that that is how sonship evolves or develops? You don't expect your son to just carry on as you are. You expect them to pick up their identity within the values, within the vision you've given them as sons. So for me, listening, that would be a natural outcome. It wouldn't be something you just picked up and put in. It would be a natural outcome of good fathering, and it would be a natural outcome of good sonship. I know I have my 2 adult children now working with me, and my prayer from the beginning, help them find themselves in this. They don't have to be Daphne. Who are they in it? And give them something that is of their own identity in it, and both of them have. So now I just want to pick that up as tweaking a little bit of what you say, to say, I see that as evidence of good sonship and good fathering.
That's good. Yeah, I think I was so driven and so maybe that orphan kind of spirit of just so like my identity was what I was doing, and also there could have been mixture of ambition and and just some good in that, but it was a mixture. So I think God really needed to humble me, and I had to just lay it all down and give it up. But on the other hand, I needed to know it was mine too. When Dawn did release the authority to me, I I said, Don, I don't like Caleb. I want to call it Joshua Generations, because it was Caleb Company. I'm like, that sounds cooler. People don't even know Joshua. They don't remember, but they all remember. I mean, they don't remember Caleb, but they remember Joshua. And so let's use a name people more understand. And we're a generation like Joshua taking back the land, and, let's go. And Don said, okay, that's fine. So like for 6 months, I changed the name. I didn't do it on the whole, legal side, but I started calling. We did brochures, and I was in Africa one time after that with Heidi Baker, and I was invited to speak in all her schools, the Harvest schools, and I'm driving with her, in the bush, actually with Makayo, I think, that was probably when he was 12. And she just looked over at me. She goes, Tod, how's Caleb Company? And I was like, I was going to say, well, it's Joshua Generation. I just shut up. And I was like, it's great, and I felt the Lord just say, Tod, there's equity and there's honor in keeping the name, because Don named it that, and there's people know that. Why are you trying to do your own thing? But I needed to do my own thing to know that I had that Don really did release it to me.
Yeah.
So it's like I tested my wings, like, I'm going to change everything. And Don's like, great, that's fine. I think he bit his tongue maybe for a while. I don't know. But he is actually amazing, because that's one of the hardest things, is transitioning from generation to generation, especially in leadership and ministry. And Don and I have spoken several times in Israel, in Messianic Movement, Gentile church. We've been asked so many times, how do you do this transition well? And how do you walk as a father and a son without that competition, without that insecurity? And I think it's because Don is a true father who really did let go when he released me. And then I have grown into being secure in who I am, and just love him. Mm-hmm. And just this last year, God gave me faith and went to a neighbor. We got this another house on the hills, miraculous story, miracle. And Don moved out here. So after all these years, for the last 6 months, we live like 50 yards away from each other. He's over at my house. He's taking my son and I out to dinner tonight. I'll be at his house for Super Bowl. I mean, we just see each other. We're together this morning in worship. It's been super sweet. That's another thing it's not this forced thing. Like it's real relational, you enjoy it. Don and I both, as leaders over the years, have had people where there's a grace for a season to walk with somebody, and then it's like, man, the grace just lifted. They really bug me. I bug them. It's just not working. And actually, when we bring on staff, one of the key things I tell my team is we have to enjoy them. Like, I don't care how qualified, how spiritual they are, how gifted. If we don't laugh with them, if they don't get my sarcasm and jokes, if they don't, like, they can work somewhere. They can work with you guys. I mean, you guys are much more patient, probably. But
no.
I just don't know about that.
No. One of our qualifications for people coming to us is they've got to have a sense of humor.
Yeah, and come on. That's what keeps us together.
They aren't going to be able to handle British sarcasm.
No. I was going to say, you guys kind of have the market on sarcasm. That's some of my roots, I think.
Yeah.
But
Sorry.
Dawn and I we looked at each other over the years going, do we still enjoy this? Do we still enjoy being together? And we do. So we're flying together to Egypt, in the beginning of April, and then we're flying together to Israel. I was just with him last year in Iraq. I was with him in Egypt. I was with him, in Jordan. We enjoy each other, and that's when it's true fathering and it's family. And you don't have to force it. You actually love to walk together, and I believe that's kingdom.
Yeah.
And it's mutual, isn't it? It's not like the hierarchy thing doesn't really come into it. It's mutual because I'm sure in 1,000 ways you are still empowering and you are still, you are, I don't like the word helping, but anyway, you're still empowering and enabling Don to live out who he is in a way that he couldn't do if he didn't have you. And that works both ways. So it's a mutual care, love, experience.
And you often talk a bit about the whole generational transfer is something that we talk about in our conferences, and how Don was the father and you were the son. And when the roles change, you become the father and Don becomes the grandfather. And then you have the sons. And so, you know, Don then has to act like the grandfather would act. And of course, the father still goes to his dad, to the grandfather, for advice and honors him and wants the input. But then the grandfather has to say, well, now I've given you my thoughts. Now it's over to you to then make the decision of how you're then going to interact with your sons. And so it's learning, you know, if we're going to be a family and we're going to do the father-son thing, well, at some point you have to be the granddad, and then these roles and the attitudes and perspectives all change.
So good. I'm jealous of grandfathers and grandmothers, to be honest, because the fathers have to pay the bills and, you know, deal with the crying children. Actually, and
don't go down that. Let me just tell you something, Tod. It doesn't work like that. You still end up paying bills. You still end up with the tears. You still end up with it all. So, you know, don't go too down that way. I'm just pulling you back a little bit, okay?
Well, actually, no, that's true. It's true. You're always a parent. You're always But I feel like that definitely is true. But I'm actually in a place right now where I am wanting to be more the grandpa, even with my team. I have a team that God's brought some strong leaders, and I realize my putting my hands in everything is not empowering them. And so I'm actually feeling like I'm supposed to be more of a grandpa. I call it father, but you know, I what you're saying, like, I think I'm supposed to let these guys start really running Caleb. I think my destiny has been to be a grandpa. I can't wait to have real grandkids and just take them all over the earth and ruin them for the ordinary and then give them back to their parents.
Well, and ruin your own kids and ruin them for theirs as well. But I think Tod, this understanding of parent, grandparent, sonship is what goes wrong, or the lack of understanding so often in this transfer generationally, because it requires, it isn't just a formal, you do the jobs, it's change of heart, change of attitude, change of relationship, not worse, but it's a change. And I think it's a beautiful testimony in the earth, the way that you are operating as a son, that you have a father, and may it roll on from generation to generation to generation to generation.
Yeah. Orlador.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tod, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time. We love you and Don. Whenever we get to see you, it's not very often. Would be great to see you more, but we appreciate you, and even some of the people that have gone through some of our training in the past are now with you guys. So thank you for continuing to pour into them and raising them up. So thank you so much.
Man, yeah, thank you guys. You guys are awesome. I love what you're doing. God bless you guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If it inspired you, please rate us and subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or another podcast platform.